So my hope for this week, for this video, is to be pretty short and to provide you a little bit of extra depth into the do's and don'ts, the suggested do's and don'ts of holding a conference, and to also allow you a little bit of extra space this week to really get into your communication experiments assignment. That's really the bulk of this module. We've entered into the module of what I'm considering an intensive skills practice and demonstration. The purpose of this is to do just that, to practice and demonstrate the skill sets that we've talked about. That of the skills of self-awareness, the skills of active listening and responding appropriately, into the skills of communication, and also maintaining a professional stance, which I consider to be a type of skill. So that goes through two modules. Self-awareness is kind of split up into like self-observation and self-regulation, if you remember. The module of communication is split up more into active listening, responding appropriately, and maintaining a professional stance. So that's all those things that I'm going to be looking for in your communication experiments short video, and also during the family involvement and communication plan that we're going to act out together in that last class meeting. So all I intend to do in terms of PowerPoint lecture and assignment between now and then is really to try to help you to try to provide you with more resources to sharpen those skills. So just some things to keep in mind, and some maybe extra ideas of ways to practice them, and how I'm going to be looking for them. So I've mentioned the do's and don'ts on the last PowerPoint as a reference point for the family communication plan. I just want to go over a little more detail of what those really look like. I'm kind of a stickler for reducing things to the smallest necessary component of what I'm trying to learn or talk about. I find that textbooks can be exceedingly loquacious is the word, like overly done, wordy, lengthy, repetitive, things like that. Kind of drives me nuts, especially considering how expensive they tend to be. Now, this is a good book that we have, and there's a lot of reason for going on and on about certain things. But from what I took from this chapter, I think it's chapter 4 that we have for this, I think it's the 4th chapter, a lot of things can be kind of summed up. We're focusing on a conference scenario, and a conference to me is a type of a formal meeting in close proximity between you, the professional, and some representative or representatives of the child or the family of the child. And I think that's probably the most versatile type of situation to consider, because if you're going to be a therapist, that's basically what you're going to do in sessions. If you're going to be a teacher in a classroom, you're going to do parent-teacher conferences. If you're going to work in a child care setting, any official meetings with parents or families are basically going to mirror a conference. And so you'll probably be doing that a lot more often than other types of meetings. And anything you do in a conference can be somewhat softened to fit the informal setting. So I think it's a good place for us to focus in on, so that we don't have to go through each thing in full depth. So what I've basically done is broken the do's and don'ts into 4 categories of each that I think are most helpful for organizing this information. If it's not helpful for you, then rename stuff the way that fits what you think works based on the information in the text. But this is how I think of running a conference or a session or a meeting, and I think that it's pretty beneficial or pretty helpful. So with the do's, things we do want to have happen, or ways that we want to handle ourselves or facilitate some kind of conference or session or formal meeting. With the physical space, we want to make sure we reserve a particular space to have it. In counseling, it's one of those essential points. If you don't have a space to practice therapy, you can't do it. You can't go to the public library and hold therapy sessions. You can't do it at a bus stop, whatever. Formal meetings or conferences should definitely have a space dedicated for that purpose. It can be dedicated to other things too at other times, but if you're using a classroom space, nothing else should be going on if you can help that. I've been a part of meetings either as a parent or as a facilitator where the environment was kind of more flexible, where maybe children were there doing some other activity while parents or family members spoke with the professional. And I think that's pretty acceptable if the child or children are there as a part of that family. Generally, conferences should be held away from outside people. For instance, it probably shouldn't happen during the school day in a classroom while the class is being held. If you're the, say, lead teacher in a classroom and you have an assistant, it probably isn't the best place to hold a conference while the assistant does a class activity, for instance. So it should be a space specifically for it. It should be a space that can be relatively undisturbed, and you should set yourself to be undisturbed during that time. So turn your phone off, don't check email, things like that. And also set it up so that you know that no one's going to come in and out. You probably shouldn't hold it in a space where an after-school activity needs to come in and get supplies or something like that. This is all kind of a part of planning. The physical space itself, you should do your best to make warm and inviting. It can be a nice way to begin and to foster a sense of comfort with the people you're meeting with. In terms of attitude, this is really in reference to you, the professional's way of approaching and approaching the meeting and expressing yourself during it. You try to be as friendly and positive as you can. That does not mean that you neglect pointing out or addressing negative points that need to be addressed, but you can do that in a way that is interactive. That means that you have an expectation of the parents or family members to participate, and you guide them to be accountable for that. But you also maintain a collaborative stance where you allow it to be a both and, a give and take, as opposed to you directing the flow of the meetings solely. You should not be in total control of or at the helm all the time. It's a reciprocal kind of environment, and you should do those things honestly. We can be honest about even sensitive things in a positive and friendly way, and finding that balance can be a challenge. But I think using the skills we've talked about this semester, that's very, very accessible. Also, considering the skills we've talked about, in particular the self-awareness module, maintaining calm, composure, especially during intense periods of the meeting, is essential. Okay? Not getting caught up in the emotionality of what could possibly come up. In terms of emphasis, you want to emphasize learning and development. That's why you're there meeting. You want to emphasize finding solutions rather than hearkening problems, continually driving the negative parts of things. You want to focus on what's relevant. It's a time that is devoted for that, and you want to be sensitive to their time and also respectful for your own. And you want to be specific. It's helpful to remain observable about concrete things that you hear and see. so that they know exactly what you're talking about, so that the family or parents know exactly what you're talking about. The result of a conference or a session or a meeting should always consider or should always be aimed toward improving the relationship, whether or not problems are resolved. But you want to try to aim toward a resolution of problems or issues. But the main thing is improving the relationship, at least maintaining a consistency in the relationship. You want to make sure that you're future focused also, so you're thinking about how you might create or modify any action plans that you, the professional, or the family can follow through with. Plan follow-up meetings so that you make sure that everyone's on the same page, extended out into the future. And when you finish, make sure that it's known that you finish. Set a conclusive final point of the meeting and wrap it up. Okay. Thank you for coming in. I appreciate you meeting. I'm glad we had a chance. I look forward to seeing you, the next time we meet. Have a good day. Make sure there's the line there so you're not continuing the meeting out in the parking lot. Okay, some don'ts, or some of the things that I think are the principles that can be extracted from what our text kind of provided for us. In terms of attitude, don't take the role as an expert. That's a little bit of a contentious point, possibly. Sometimes you, in fact, are the expert, and you should guide things as an expert. The suggestion not to assume the role of an expert is merely to point out that you're not the one on the podium leading the family through what they don't know about. They are, in fact, the experts of their own children and family. And if you treat them that way, they kind of know it. And you can be an expert at related to development, related to interactions, but the specifics of the people involved, you should treat them like their own experts, the experts of their own lives, because they are. Do your best not to make assumptions about the members of the family or jump to conclusions. In terms of word choice, be very careful about using technical language like jargon or acronyms that parents and families might not be familiar with or used to. Do your best to avoid negative labels or negative language. Certainly no name calling. And name calling kind of slides in sometimes when we talk about children. Saying that a child is a mess maker or a troublemaker might seem to point toward behaviors, but really just labels the child negatively. Instead, saying that a child might have a hard time keeping their space clean, or has a habit of a few certain class guidelines, going against certain class guidelines or something like that. Stick with behavior and observable things. Within the interaction, do your best to avoid inappropriate or unsolicited advice. We talked about advice during our communications module, and you want to be really careful about how you use it, especially more strong advice like urging. Usually suggestion is or even strong suggestion is sufficient, and at a certain point some serious things should be emphasized as a piece of advice or even urging on your part. Just make sure that you do that on purpose. Be very careful not to purposefully or unintentionally argue or blame members of the family. That immediately puts the wall up, and you're not going to make it very much further with them. Make sure that professionalism is maintained. Do your best to make your interaction with that person a building of a positive professional relationship with them. We can teeter into friendliness, which feels personable, but if we tip all the way into making it more of a personal relationship, then we have what's called dual relationship. You can be friends with the parents of children you teach. My wife and I, for instance, have friend relationships with our children's teachers now or their previous teachers. My wife's maintained strong personal relationships with former students, parents, and that's all fine. It just has to be known and it has to be acknowledged within yourself. If that's something that it has taken place or is developing, it might be useful to describe or to point that out in the conference, saying basically, pretty straightforwardly, now we're friends here and that's fine. Let's step into kind of teacher-parent role for a minute so we can talk about these issues or have this conference. And then when you finish the conference, if you go see each other over the weekend or whatever else, you can reestablish or continue in that personal relationship. It's a tough line to find and balance sometimes. The result should definitely not deteriorate the relationship, whatever the relationship is like, whether or not a solution is found. Sometimes solutions can be found that are very helpful and beneficial solutions, but the path to get there has damaged the relationship. And it would have been better just for the solution to be unresolved temporarily. Overall, you don't want the experience to be a negative one from the people in the family. You definitely don't want them to walk away with a negative attitude about you or their child's experience with you. Okay, so some specific instances of formal meetings. These are just some things that I think, like I said, I've kind of picked out from the reading that are probably most important in my eyes. With classroom events, that is when you're seeing a lot of parents and children at one time in your classroom, festivals and things like that, or like welcome days or open houses or anything like that. You should do your best with any presentation you make, any introductions you make, to be as organized and concise as possible. You want to give them the relevant information in a timely way and in a concise way, in a clear, short manner, but long enough to give the information. Okay, so avoid running on and on. With conferences, we've already talked about that, but I would like to emphasize that you should have a plan or even an outline written for yourself, and to emphasize again this idea that you're sharing the airtime, as it were, with members of the family. It's not all, shouldn't be driven all by you, the professional. It should be reciprocal, collaborative time. A few specifics about IEP meetings. Some of you might find yourself participating in some of those in your career, and there are lots of different things surrounding IEPs in terms of protocol and structure, and that will honestly be something that I think will be best learned as you prepare yourself for what they might be like, and then as you get into those situations, learning with people who've been doing it a long time. Fortunately, with something like IEP meetings, there are mandatory members who should be there. If a child's in a general education classroom, representative from that, if any special education representative, a school administrator or a facility administrator, like a principal or something like that, any relevant therapists or additional teachers, and the parents, of course, who are important members of that. And sometimes the child will be there depending on their age and the situation and things. So that's a good thing, because when you are in that situation, you can ask lots of questions leading up to the event. You can watch others go through it, and you can learn a lot doing that. A few things that should probably be a pretty mainstay part of IEP meetings is stating the purpose of why you're having it. You shouldn't have IEP meetings for no reason, just because you're supposed to, it's the end of the year or whatever. State a purpose out for why you're meeting and try to stick to it. The way you stick to it is by setting goals and orienting yourself toward those goals. So do your best to maintain that. Something I think is really important is to emphasize in the meeting and when talking about IEPs, the rights and responsibilities of the parents. This is something you should emphasize for yourself as the professional also, but should be made pretty clear because parents aren't always familiar with um, processes like IEP. So helping them by giving them the expectations of what the school or the professionals might seek from them, from the parents, but also extend the opportunities for parents to know what they have the rights for, so that they can exercise them. There's a period of IEP meetings where data is shared, information is exchanged, and that's bidirectional. The professionals share student progress and goals and other observations with the family, and the family shares data about the child with the professionals. What's going on at home, different life events, different things that they notice come up in the child's life or in their personality or things like that. Upon conclusion, planned follow-up should be loosely scheduled, if not specifically scheduled. And that can be informal follow-ups with the family, and then the next formal IEP meeting. A quick word about parent-teacher associations or organizations. The purpose of these types of things is to give the students and parents the voice, to give them resource, and to act as advocates. It should be viewed, these organizations should be viewed as one component of a we. That means the professionals at the facility and a collective group of parents, families, and children. It's not an us and them. It should be a collaborative we. It's represented by the organization and the facility where the professionals work. Sometimes we'll have opportunities to meet with parents and families informally, and I'm not going to mention a whole lot about this except just to point out a couple of examples. Like sometimes parents or family members will just will be at a school, either in picking up their child or delivering something or something like that. This is like when you see them in the hallway or they pop into the class for a minute. Very informal. And this is a time when these are times when there should be a pretty clear line related to subject matter. You should not launch into major issues or concerns that could be best addressed during conferences, formal meeting times. So just making sure if it's an informal meeting to maintain that informality. If it slides into a formal kind of conversation or more in-depth, it would be appropriate to say, we're kind of talking about something that I'd really like to give you a lot of time to work through with. Let's set aside a time or set up a meeting so that I can give you my full attention and so that we can go through these things properly. A word about home visits. Try, if it's an appropriate thing to do in your position, whatever that is, try to make sure that home visits happen. They can be extremely powerful things for young children to see the professionals that will work with them interacting in their environment, in their world, at their home with family members. It's a really powerful thing to be able to do. And as you're doing that, maintain the best you can all of the types of skills we've talked about. The self-awareness skills, the skills of communication, and then maintaining that professional stance. And that can be hard when you're outside of your work environment. Ultimately, however, I would like to suggest that you make sure that you do your best to maintain a level of comfort and security in where you are and whatever is going on there. There are limits, of course, to things that are appropriate in the home, and you have to take that into consideration. If you notice things that are reportable, for instance, you have to, of course, do something about that. However, if you are on a home visit and you sit on their couch and you see like bugs run out from under the couch or something like that, that can be a tough thing to deal with for the professional. However, it would be most advisable not to jump up and scream how disgusting it is to you. That can be an extremely damaging part of the fledgling relationship. Doing your best to maintain calm, doing your best to flow with what's going on there, to let them know that you're okay where they are, with who they are and where they are. And with interacting with volunteers in the classroom, I'd like to emphasize the professional stance. Again, you're maintaining that professional stance by continuing doing your job while they're there, and it's a way for them to observe what goes on while you're there, and do your best to lean on them while they're there. Don't let them. You don't want to pass the baton completely and let them become the teacher fully, because that's why you're there. But if you allow them to feel engaged and involved and important while they're there, they'll have a good experience. You'll have a good experience. It'll probably make the day a little easier for you, and more effective. And it can create an environment there where parents and family are welcome to be a part of the student's development and learning. And that can be an enormous leap forward in your relationships with parents and families overall. All right, so that's it for the information for this week. As you get started on and continue your communications project and family involvement plan, stay in contact with me if you have any points of confusion or anything like that, so that you feel most prepared and that you've been able to cover everything fully. Okay?